The flickering neon light cast eerie shadows across the concrete walls, painting them in sickly hues of blue and orange as the prison guard stepped into the cell. His footsteps echoed in the confined space, each one deliberate and final. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, counting down the moments that remained in a life the system had deemed unworthy of continuation. "That's it, Donovan. The time has come." Officer Thomas Sullivan's voice sounded almost robotic, devoid of the emotion that should accompany such words. He delivered this message 17 times in his career, but it never got easier, just more mechanical, as if the repetition had worn away his capacity to feel. His weathered face, lined from 20 years in the correction system, betrayed nothing of the unease that always accompanied these final hours. "Maxwell Max." Donovan slowly raised his head. His wrists were locked in heavy shackles that bit into his skin, leaving marks that matched the deeper lines etched into his face. Physical reminders of the 5 years spent on death row. His once vibrant blue eyes had faded to a tired gray, but there was no fear in them, only steady determination that had sustained him through endless appeals and crushed hopes. At 37, he looked a decade older, his once muscular frame leaner now, though still carrying the disciplined posture of his military background. "I have one last request," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. The words hung in the stale air between them. "I want to see my dog, Storm." Officer Sullivan hesitated, his stoic facade cracking slightly. In his 15 years working at Blackwater State Penitentiary, he'd heard all manner of final requests, special meals, family visits, religious ceremonies, but a dog. The incongruity of it momentarily disrupted his professional distance. Rules were rules, but the request's simplicity struck him somewhere beneath his carefully maintained armor. "I'll ask," he muttered, and left the heavy metal door clanging shut behind him, with a finality that reverberated through the small cell, echoing the countless similar closings that had punctuated Max's existence for 826 days. Max closed his eyes and leaned back against the cold wall, the rough concrete catching on the thin fabric of his prison jumpsuit. In his mind, he saw Storm, his loyal German shepherd, the only friend he had left after the arrest that had shattered his life 5 years ago. The memory was vivid despite the passage of time. Storm's intelligent eyes, the precise pattern of black and tan in his coat. His protective stance, the way his ears perked up at the slightest sound of danger. He remembered the night he rescued the pup from the shelter, just weeks after returning from his 3rd tour overseas. The nightmares had been particularly bad. Then fragments of firefights, the faces of fallen comrades, the concussive memory of IEDs that left his ears ringing even in the silence of his apartment. The dog had been caged and frightened, much like Max himself had felt in those days when the world seemed too loud, too fast, too much. There had been an immediate connection, 2 wounded warriors finding solace in each other. Just once, he whispered into the emptiness of his cell, the words barely disturbing the air. "I just want to see him one more time." The memories washed over him in waves bittersweet in their clarity. Storm had pulled him out of the darkest time in his life, a period when Max had seriously contemplated ending it all, after losing his team in an ambush outside Kandahar. The dog had needed walks, needed feeding, needed care, and in providing those things, Max had found purpose again. Each day with Storm had been one more reason to keep going, one more thin thread connecting him to life. Now those threads were about to be severed permanently. Outside the prison walls 15 miles away in a small countryside house surrounded by towering pines and wild meadowgrass. The phone rang, cutting through the peaceful evening. The old-fashioned landline jangled persistently until a hand reached for it, hesitating momentarily before picking up the receiver. Dr. Olivia Liv Chen, a young veterinarian with tired eyes and messy black hair, pulled into a haphazard bun, balanced the phone between her shoulder and ear as she continued sorting medications. Her small veterinary practice barely paid the bills, but the work gave her purpose after leaving her high-pressure position at a prestigious urban animal hospital. Her fingers stilled on a bottle of antibiotics as she answered. "Yes." Her voice carried the slight rasp of someone who hadn't spoken much that day. preferring the company of her animal patients to most humans. Dr. Chen, this is Warden Gabriel Frost from Blackwater State Penitentiary. The man's deep voice carried a gravity that immediately set her nerves on edge. It's about Maxwell Donovan. He made a final request, and it's about the dog you're taking care of. Liv froze, the bottle slipping from her fingers to land silently on the couch cushion. Her heart started pounding against her ribs like a caged animal seeking escape. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. 5 years of caring for Storm, of becoming the link between a condemned man and his beloved companion, culminating in this dreaded call. Ian. Storm. He wants to see Storm. The words escaped in a breathless rush, even though she already knew the answer. What else would Max ask for? Who else did he have? Yes, he'd like to see him before. Warden Frost cleared his throat, the unfinished sentence hanging between them, more eloquent than any words could be, before it all ends. Liv pressed her lips together, fighting the sudden burning in her eyes. She had taken in Storm as a temporary arrangement. 5 years ago, when Max was first arrested, temporary had become permanent, but she had never forgotten who Storm really belonged to. Never let the dog forget either. Over the years, she had received dozens of letters from Max, carefully reading each one that detailed his unwavering belief that the truth would come out one day. His handwriting had been steady at first, then increasingly desperate as appeal after appeal was denied. She had started writing back after the third letter and eventually began visiting. Somewhere along the way, she had become convinced of his innocence, not just because she wanted to believe it, but because the inconsistencies in the case bothered her scientific mind. "I'll bring him," she said firmly, glancing at the antique grandfather clock in the corner. "Give me 1 hour." After hanging up, she hurried to the kitchen door, whistling for Storm. "Storm, come here, boy." But when she called for the dog, there was no answer. No clicking of nails on hardwood, no joyful bark, no familiar weight leaning against her legs. The silence was wrong, oppressive. "Storm!" Liv called again, her voice rising with the first whispers of panic. She checked the backyard, the garage, all the rooms in the small farmhouse. The front door was locked exactly as she had left it when returning from her clinic, but the porch window was slightly open, just enough for a determined animal to push through. A torn piece of leash lay on the wooden floor, the frayed ends evidence of desperate chewing. Full-blown panic took over. Liv Storm was gone, not just wandering in the backyard or hiding under the bed, gone. And tonight of all nights, when Max needed him most. With shaking hands, she dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. One she had promised herself she would never use again, except in the direst emergency. She listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times, each ring stretching her nerves thinner. "Lewis, I need your help. It's about Max and Storm." The words tumbled out before he could even properly answer. There was a pause on the other end. Then a deep voice replied, each word measured and deliberate. "I'm on my way." Lewis Cook had been Max's partner in the private military company they'd both joined after leaving Special Forces. Their paths had diverged after Max's arrest. Lewis turning his skills toward a shadowy career that operated in the gray areas between government contracts and private security, but he had never believed Max was guilty, never stopped trying to uncover the truth in his own way. Minutes were rushing by, precious and irretrievable. Liv searched the whole house again, methodically looking inside closets, under furniture. In every space a large dog might possibly hide. Storm had vanished, leaving behind only the torn leash and a single tuft of fur caught on the window frame. She ran out onto the porch, peering into the darkness of the garden that faded into the woods beyond. The cool night air carried a distant bark, but was it Storm or some other dog in the rural neighborhood? Moonlight silvered the tops of the pine trees, casting long shadows that could hide anything or anyone. Just as she was about to get into her car to begin searching the roads, headlights swept up the drive, illuminating the yard with harsh white light. A black Dodge Charger screeched to a stop in front of the house, the engine growling before falling silent. The driver's door swung open and a tall man unfolded himself from the vehicle. Lewis Cook moved with the predatory grace of someone who had spent his life in dangerous situations and survived them all. The moonlight revealed scars crisscrossing the right side of his face, remnants of an explosion years ago that had killed 3 members of their team. Those scars seemed to hold stories he never told a past. He kept buried beneath layers of grim humor and lethal competence. "What happened?" he asked without preamble. His eyes were sharp like a predator's, taking in every detail of the scene before him. "Storm is missing." Liv breathed out the words tasting like ash. "The porch window is open. The leash is torn. Someone took him." Lewis and Max doesn't have much time left at all. Lewis cursed under his breath the words low and vicious. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Marcus, we have a problem. The dog's been taken. Not just any dog, Max's dog. Find out who's behind it. I want traffic cam footage. Security videos, anything from this area in the last 6 hours." While Lewis talked, giving the address and details to whoever was on the other end of the line, Liv's mind raced through the events of the previous day. Suddenly she recalled a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. A black sedan that had slowly passed her house several times. "I saw a car yesterday," she murmured, interrupting Lewis's conversation. "A dark sedan, possibly a Lincoln Continental. It passed by the house 2 or 3 times, moving slowly. I thought it was someone lost or looking for an address, but now..." Lewis nodded curtly, relaying the information into the phone before hanging up. "Then we have a place to start, get in?" His tone brooked no argument, and Liv found herself sliding into the passenger seat of the Charger without conscious decision. The engine roared to life, and they shot down the driveway, gravel spraying behind them. At the same time, somewhere in the city's industrial zone, Storm was pulling at a chain attached to his collar, the metal links rattling against concrete. The dog growled softly, his ears twitching at every sound. Years of training as Max's companion had honed his senses to detect danger, and every instinct told him he was in a hostile environment. The warehouse was dark, with only one flickering light above, casting a dim yellow glow that barely penetrated the gloom. The air smelled of rust, abandoned machinery, and the sea they were near the docks. Storm could hear water lapping against pilings. Somewhere beyond the walls could smell the brine and diesel that permeated the port area. A man in a gray suit leaned against a crate, watching him with a smug smile. His manicured hand held an expensive cigarette, the smoke curling upward in the stale air. "Beautiful dog," he said, taking a drag and exhaling slowly. "German Shepherd, military grade. Too bad he was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Vincent Blackwood had built his career solving problems for powerful people. Sometimes those problems were legal issues, sometimes public relations crises, and sometimes people who knew too much. Tonight's job was simple: keep the dog away from the condemned man until the execution was complete. The fact that the dog might know something more complicated matters, but Blackwood prided himself on adaptability. Another man, thin with cold eyes and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl, stepped out of the shadows. He wore tactical gear and carried himself with military precision. The order was just to keep him away until after the execution, not to hurt him. Yet, Blackwood, corporate fixer and problem solver for people who didn't like loose ends, shrugged elegantly. "It all depends on what our friend Max does next, though I don't see what options he has left, considering he'll be dead in..." He checked his platinum watch. "Approximately 4 hours. Storm barked furiously, lunging against the chain with such force that Blackwood took an involuntary step backward. The dog's intelligent eyes seemed to understand the conversation, and he would fight with everything he had to get back to his owner. Meanwhile, Max sat on his prison bed, staring at a narrow strip of moonlight falling through the barred window onto the floor of his cell. In just a few hours, everything would be over. 5 years of maintaining his innocence, of filing appeals, of holding on to hope, even as each legal avenue closed, all coming to an end in the antiseptic execution chamber down the hall. The cell door opened again. Officer Sullivan stepped in, followed by Warden Gabriel Frost, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the weight of his responsibility evident in the deep lines around his eyes. "We've got a problem," the warden said, his face serious. "The dog is missing. Someone took him just before he was supposed to be brought here." Max's breath caught in his throat. A cold wave of disbelief washed over him, followed by a surge of anger so intense it momentarily robbed him of speech. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a harsh whisper. "What, who? We don't know, but we're working on it." The warden's tone was professional, but there was something like sympathy in his eyes. "I've given permission for the dog's caretaker to delay bringing him until the last possible moment if they can find him." Max's hands clenched into fists, the chains between his wrists rattling. His last wish, the only thing that had kept him going through the darkest nights, had been stolen. But who would do that, and why? Unless someone didn't want him to see Storm. Unless Storm knew something or had something that could change everything. The thought hit Max with sudden clarity. Storm had been with him the night of the murder. He was convicted of the night pharmaceutical executive, Jonathan Pembroke, was found dead in his high-rise apartment. Max had maintained his innocence from the beginning, insisting he was being framed, but with his fingerprints on the murder weapon and a history of publicly threatening Pembroke after his sister died from a tainted medication. Pembroke's company had rushed to market, the jury hadn't believed him. But Storm had been there. And if someone was desperate enough to steal a death row inmate's dog hours before execution, perhaps Max's claims of a frame-up weren't so far-fetched after all. "Warden," Max said quietly, a new urgency in his voice. "I need to make a phone call." "It's a little late for that. Donovan?" Frost replied, though without much conviction. Something about this situation felt wrong. To the veteran corrections officer, had felt wrong from the beginning. 27 years in the system had given him a nose for irregularities. Sir, Max pressed, "I think Storm might have evidence that could exonerate me. Why else would someone take him tonight of all nights?" The warden studied him for a long moment, weighing decades of procedure against the possibility of a miscarriage of justice. Finally, he nodded. "One call. Make it count." Lewis's Charger sped through the empty streets of Portsmouth, the clock on the dashboard reading 2:17 a.m. The city slept unaware of the drama unfolding in its shadows, of the race against time that might determine whether an innocent man lived or died. The lights of downtown receded behind them as they headed toward the industrial district, a maze of warehouses and shipping facilities that lined the harbor. Liv's hands were clenched in her lap knuckles, white with tension. As they drove, Lewis made another call, his voice clipped and professional. "Marcus, any updates? Good. We've got a lead. A warehouse by the docks owned by Meridian Shipping. We need backup. Send Dimitri and Carlos full gear. Gunyang." Liv turned her head sharply at the name Meridian Shipping, as in Senator Harrison Wells' company. Lewis's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. One and the same, the good senator has his fingers in the many pies, some less savory than others. But why would a U.S. senator care about Max or his dog, Liv asked. Though pieces were already clicking into place in her mind, Max had been investigating Meridian Shipping's connection to illegal pharmaceutical imports in the weeks before his arrest. That, Lewis replied grimly, is exactly what we're going to find out. Liv fully understood that time was not on their side. If they didn't find Storm, Max would die without ever seeing him again, and possibly without the evidence they needed to save his life. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. The port was shrouded in early dawn shadows when they arrived. A thin fog drifted between the abandoned warehouses, giving the scene an otherworldly quality. The water gently slapped against the pier walls, and gulls cried in the distance, wheeling against the lightening sky. Lewis parked the Charger in a dark alley between two buildings and killed the lights. With practiced movements, he pulled a gun from under the seat and checked it before tucking it into a shoulder holster. From the glove compartment, he retrieved a second weapon and offered it to Liv. "Stay in the car," he set, his tone leaving no room for argument. Liv narrowed her eyes, a spark of defiance lighting them from within. "Forget it. That's my dog in there." She didn't take the gun, but instead pulled out a small canister of pepper spray from her pocket. "And I'm not letting you go in alone." Lewis looked at her for a long moment, then sighed a sound somewhere between exasperation and reluctant respect. "Then stay close. If things go bad, run, don't look back, don't wait for me. Get to the car and drive to the address in the GPS. My people will help you." She nodded once her mouth set in a determined line. They crept toward the warehouse marked with a fading 13 on its rusted door. Lewis pressed against the wall, trying to peek through a dirty window. The glass was clouded with years of grime, but he could make out movement inside. Shadows shifted in the dim light. Two men, one in a suit, pacing nervously, the other standing guard near a chained animal. And in the middle, still tethered but alert and ready to fight, was Storm. "Two men that I can see," Lewis whispered. "The guy in the suit is Vincent Blackwood. He's a fixer for Meridian Industries, dangerous but not the muscle type. And the other, ex-military most likely. The way he stands, the way he checks his surroundings, he's been trained. The type who follows orders without asking questions." Lewis's lips curved in a predatory smile. "This guy has no idea who he's messing with." Liv clenched her fists, anger replacing fear. "Then let's show him." Meanwhile, Max paced inside his cell, the chains on his wrists and ankles, making each step a noisy reminder of his captivity. He had no idea what was happening outside these walls. But one thing was clear, someone really didn't want him to see Storm. The question was why? Was it just cruelty or something more? The warden was still standing in the doorway, watching Max with an unreadable expression. "I've made some calls," he said finally. "Your attorney is on her way, and I've authorized a temporary stay of execution 2 hours. It's all I can do without a court order." Max stopped pacing and looked the warden in the eyes. "Please," he said hoarsely. "I don't have much time." The warden sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of a system he served but didn't always agree with. "We're doing everything we can." But Max knew it wasn't enough. 2 hours wasn't enough to find Storm, to discover what someone was willing to kill for, to unravel a conspiracy 5 years in the making. He needed a miracle. And miles away, that miracle was preparing to storm a warehouse. Lewis hid behind a pile of crates and counted quietly, his experienced eye taking in every detail of the situation. 2 guards visible, maybe more in the shadows. The warehouse was large with multiple exits and plenty of hiding places. Advantage them. Liv picked up a rusty pipe from the ground, testing its weight in her hand. "We can't waste time." Lewis smirked, a flash of white teeth in the darkness. "I like your spirit." With a smooth motion, he threw a small rock at the metal wall. The loud clang echoed through the building, startling the men inside. "What was that?" The guard's voice carried through the thin walls. "No idea. Go check." Blackwood's tone was dismissive, used to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. The guard pulled out a gun and headed for the door. As soon as he stepped out into the pre-dawn light, Lewis moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Before the man could react, Lewis grabbed him from behind, one hand covering his mouth, while the other delivered a precise blow to the back of the head. The guard collapsed unconscious, and Lewis dragged him behind the crates. "Not bad," Liv whispered, impressed despite herself. Inside, Storm barked loudly, a sharp, familiar sound that sent hope surging through Liv. He heard her. He knew they were coming. But Blackwood reacted to the dog's sudden alert. He pulled a sleek pistol from inside his jacket and pointed it at Storm. "One more step and the dog dies." He called out, his voice steady. "I know you're out there. Show yourself, or I put a bullet in his head." Liv stopped breathing, fear icing her veins, but Lewis just chuckled quietly, the sound unnervingly confident. "You really have no idea who you're dealing with?" He gave a small signal, a soft whistle that would have been inaudible to most, but to a dog trained as Storm had been, it was a command. Before Blackwood could react, Storm, still chained, lunged at him with a furious growl. The chain's anchor point held, but it was long enough for Storm to reach Blackwood's arm. Powerful jaws clamped down on the man's wrist, and the gun clattered to the floor as he screamed in pain and surprise. At that precise moment, the warden was walking quickly down the prison corridor, keys jangling at his side. Officer Sullivan followed half a step behind, confusion evident on his face. "Sir, this is highly irregular. The protocol states I'm well aware of the protocol. Sullivan Warden Frost cut him off. But I'm not sending an innocent man to his death if there's even a chance we've got this wrong. They reached Max's cell, and the warden unlocked it with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. Donovan, we've got news. Max turned around, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure they could hear it echoing off the concrete walls. What is it? Come with me now. The warden's voice held an urgency that brooked no argument. At the abandoned warehouse, Storm had broken free. In the chaos of his attack on Blackwood, the chain had pulled loose from its rusty anchor in the concrete floor. It still dangled from his neck, but it didn't slow him down. With one strong leap, he knocked Blackwood to the floor. The gun skittered across the floor out of reach. Storm back, Liv called, but the dog ignored her. Growling low in his throat, he stood over Blackwood, teeth bared and hackles raised. Every line of his body conveyed a clear message: move and die. Lewis stepped forward and kicked the gun farther away. If I were you, I wouldn't move, he said coldly. German shepherds can exert over 200 pounds of pressure with their jaws, enough to crush the bones in your throat. Blackwood blinked in shock and raised his hands in surrender. Blood dripped from his wrist where Storm's teeth had broken the skin. You have no idea what you're getting into, he muttered, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Lewis pulled out his gun and pointed it at Blackwood. Then explain it to us. Liv dropped to her knees beside Storm and gently stroked his back, feeling the tense muscles beneath her fingers. It's over, boy. We're taking you back to Max. But just then they heard tires screeching outside, car doors slammed in quick succession. Male voices shouted commands to each other. The sounds of multiple footsteps approached the warehouse. Back up, Lewis muttered, glancing toward the windows. We've got to get out of here now. Liv glanced at the back door, barely visible in the shadows. There, Ma. Lewis grabbed Blackwood by the collar and yanked him to his feet. You're coming with us. Maybe Max will want to ask you a few questions before we hand you over to the authorities. With Liv's familiar presence nearby, Storm stopped growling and relaxed his stance, following her without hesitation. The chain still dangled from his collar, rattling against the concrete floor as they moved. They ran through the warehouse, Lewis in front, pushing Blackwood ahead of him. Liv and Storm close behind. Voices shouted in the background as men stormed into the building, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. They're gone. Check the back. Another certain. Then gunshots rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets pinged off metal and thudded into wooden crates. Liv ducked instinctively, feeling Storm press against her legs protectively. They burst through the back door into the gray light of dawn. Lewis's Charger waited in the alley, its black paint making it nearly invisible in the shadows. With practiced efficiency, Lewis zip-tied Blackwood's hands behind his back and shoved him into the trunk. Sorry about the accommodations, he said without a trace of sincerity, but we're short on space. More gunshots echoed from inside the warehouse as Liv helped Storm into the back seat of the car. The dog was panting heavily, his eyes alert, body tense and ready. Despite the danger, Liv felt a surge of pride. Storm had performed flawlessly, just as Max had trained him to do. Max sat in the prison van, his wrists still locked in handcuffs. The vehicle bumped along back roads, taking an indirect route to an undisclosed location. Next to him sat the warden, his expression serious. I don't know exactly what's going on, Frost said, lowering his voice so the driver couldn't hear. But I received a call from someone at the Justice Department. They're reopening your case based on new evidence. Max's heart began to race, hope flaring for the first time in years. What evidence does this have something to do with Storm? Apparently, a federal agent has found your dog and discovered something that changes everything. I got a call from higher up ordering full cooperation. They've granted a 48-hour stay while they fast-tracked the review. Max leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. Emotions warring within him. Relief, hope, anger, fear, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't unravel. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, to believe in this reprieve, or guard himself against another cruel disappointment. Where's my dog? Is he all right? The question came out raw, vulnerable. We're heading there now. the warden replied, checking his watch. To a safe house outside the city, Max nodded, struggling to process this sudden shift in his fate. After 5 years of fighting a losing battle against a system that had already decided his guilt, this unexpected chance felt almost too good to be true. But one thing he knew for sure: if Storm was alive, then there was still hope. Lewis quickly secured Blackwood in the Charger's trunk and jumped into the driver's seat. Liv was already in the passenger seat with Storm in the back, his alert eyes watching through the windows. The first bullet struck the side of the car just as Lewis started the engine, the impact making Liv flinch. "Down!" he shouted, slamming his foot on the gas. The Charger shot out of the alley and sped through the narrow streets of the Port District. In the rear-view mirror, they saw their pursuers, two black SUVs, barreling after them without hesitation. "What's by Surrey? This won't be easy," Lewis growled expertly, weaving through early morning delivery trucks and street sweepers. The sky was lightening to a pale blue, the city coming awake around them. Liv turned and looked at Storm. The dog was tense and alert, his eyes glowing with determination. She reached back to stroke his head, finding comfort in his solid presence. "We have to lose them," she said, "or we're in serious trouble." Lewis just raised an eyebrow, a hint of dark amusement flickering across his face. "Then hold on." The Charger screeched onto the main road and charged straight through a red light. Cars zoomed across the intersection, horns blaring as Lewis wove between them with millimeters to spare. A wall of traffic ahead nearly blocked the way, commuters beginning their morning drive. "Hang on!" Lewis roared, yanking the wheel hard to the right. Tires squealed as the car flew into a narrow alleyway so tight the side mirrors nearly scraped the walls. Behind them, the two SUVs attempted to follow, but the lead vehicle miscalculated the turn and slammed into a dumpster. The second SUV crashed into the first, a loud cacophony of crunching metal and shattering glass. "That'll slow them down," Lewis muttered, allowing himself a satisfied smile as he navigated through a maze of back streets and service alleys. "But not for long. They'll have others in the area." Liv let out a breath of relief and turned toward Storm, who sat in the back seat, alert, ready, loyal to the end. His eyes met hers with an intelligence that sometimes seemed almost human. She reached back to check his collar, finding it intact despite the chain that had been attached to it. The man in the trunk, Vincent Blackwood, with his hands bound behind his back, made a series of thumping sounds, followed by muffled shouts. "Let me go! You have no idea who you're dealing with." Lewis glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes cold. "Not a chance. You're going to meet Max, and you're going to explain to him exactly why someone wants his dog dead." Blackwood fell silent at that, but Liv could practically feel the fear radiating from the trunk. "This is insane," he finally said, his voice strained. "You think this is just about a dog? You have no idea who you're messing with." Liv leaned closer to the back seat, speaking through the small opening that connected to the trunk. "Then tell us why Storm is so important that someone would steal him hours before Max's execution." But Blackwood clamped his mouth shut, refusing to say more. "Coward," Lewis growled, taking a sharp turn that sent their prisoner sliding uncomfortably in the confined space. "Then Max will get the answers from you." He pressed harder on the gas, the powerful engine responding with a roar as they headed toward the outskirts of the city, where wooded hills provided natural cover and plenty of places to disappear. Max felt the vehicle come to a sudden stop after nearly an hour of driving. Through the small barred windows of the transport van, he saw they weren't at a prison or courthouse. They had stopped outside a modest cabin, set back from a rural road surrounded by dense pine trees. The location seemed deliberately isolated, far from prying eyes or easy access. "But where are we?" he asked, confusion and wariness warring within him. Warden Frost, still sitting beside him, checked his phone and nodded. "Safe house belongs to the Justice Department. Had to improvise. Circumstances changed." Max's stomach twisted with anxiety. Was this legitimate or was it a trap? After 5 years of betrayals and disappointments, trust didn't come easily. The doors swung open. 2 prison guards helped him out, the chains on his ankles making each step an effort. The morning air was cool and fresh-scented with pine, and earth smells he had almost forgotten after years of recycled prison air. And then he heard it, a deep, excited bark that sent his heart racing. Max froze, afraid to believe it was real. Suddenly, a blurry shape rushed toward him from the cabin's open door. A strong, furry body pressed against his legs, nearly knocking him off balance, despite the chains. Warm, familiar breath touched his skin. Desperate whines filled his ears. Max dropped to his knees, ignoring the bite of gravel through the thin fabric of his prison uniform. Storm was there alive whole, his tail wagging so hard his entire body shook with the force of it. The dog licked his face frantically, whining and pressing closer as if trying to eliminate any space between them. 5 years. 5 years without seeing each other, and yet the bond remained unbroken, as powerful as the day Max had been taken away in handcuffs while Storm howled from behind a locked door. "Hey boy," Max whispered, his voice breaking. "Hey, I'm here, I'm here." Out of the corner of his eye, Max saw the warden step aside quietly, watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. After a moment, Frost waved Lewis over. They spoke briefly, their conversation too low to hear, and then the warden handed the agent some papers. Lewis signed them without even looking. His attention divided between the emotional reunion and the perimeter of the property, always watching for threats. Frost gave Max a meaningful glance, then headed back to the van. "You're their responsibility now. You've got 48 hours before the execution is either permanently stayed or rescheduled," he said to Max before leaving. "Don't make me regret this." The prison guards followed their warden into the van, and the vehicle disappeared around a bend in the road, leaving Max with Storm, Lewis, and Liv outside the cabin. As he watched the van drive away, Max was surprised to see another figure approaching a man with bound hands being pushed forward by Lewis. His eyes narrowed in confusion and suspicion. "Who's that?" Liv stepped forward, her eyes bright, with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "One of the people who didn't want you to see Storm. We found him at the warehouse where they were keeping your dog." Max slowly rose to his feet, Storm pressing protectively against his leg. His gaze hardened, shoulders tense beneath the prison jumpsuit. In that moment, despite the chains and the institutional clothing, he looked dangerous, a glimpse of the man he had been before prison, a special forces operative trained to kill. Then he'd better explain why. What? Inside the cabin, which was sparsely furnished but clean, they quickly secured the prisoner to the only sturdy chair in the main room. Max stood directly in front of him, fists clenched, Storm at his side with hackles slightly raised. Max commanded, his voice low and controlled. "Why did you take my dog?" Blackwood hesitated, then let out a quiet laugh that held no humor. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've just walked into, what you've escaped from." Max's stare remained ice cold. "Then explain it to me. It's not just about you," Blackwood said, glancing nervously at Storm, who hadn't taken his eyes off the prisoner. "This is much bigger than a wrongful conviction case, much bigger than a pharmaceutical executive's murder." Lewis pulled out his gun and slowly spun the cylinder. The metallic clicks unnervingly loud in the quiet room. "I've got patience, but not forever." Blackwood swallowed hard, his confident facade beginning to crack. "You think this was just a game? Your dog wasn't taken by accident, Donovan. He was supposed to be eliminated permanently." Liv frowned, stepping closer. "Why, what could a dog possibly have to do with all this?" The prisoner clenched his jaw and stayed silent, a calculation visible behind his eyes as he weighed his options. Then Storm stepped forward, baring his teeth and growling. The sounds started low, almost subsonic, then built to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Blackwood flinched in his seat, genuine fear flashing across his face. The calculation in his eyes quickly shifted to self-preservation. Because that dog knows something, or rather he's carrying something no one is supposed to see. Max's stomach tightened with sudden understanding. His mind raced back to the night everything changed, the night he was arrested. Before the police arrived, in those chaotic moments after finding Pembroke's body, he had made a desperate decision. "Storm," he whispered, dropping to one knee. The dog immediately turned away from Blackwood, responding to his master's voice. Max met Storm's intelligent eyes and whispered a command in German that made the dog sit perfectly still. Storm tilted his head slightly, as if understanding that his owner was looking for something important. Max ran his fingers through the thick fur around the dog's neck, feeling beneath the collar, until his fingers touched something solid, a small object secured in a hidden pocket built into the collar's inner lining. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the mysterious item. It was a tiny flash drive, no larger than his thumbnail, securely hidden all these years. Max's eyes shot to the man in the suit. "What's on it?" His voice was deadly quiet. Blackwood smirked, a flash of his earlier arrogance returning now that the dog's attention was elsewhere. "The truth." Max stared at the small drive in his hand, turning it over carefully as if it might disappear. He had spent 5 years in a cell, 5 years hoping for justice, and now finally there was something tangible, something real in his hand that might prove his innocence. Liv gave Lewis a worried look. "We need to find out what's on it." Lewis nodded, scanning the cabin. "I know a place where we can do that safely, but we need to move fast. Once they realize their man hasn't reported in, they'll track him here." Then he pointed the gun at Blackwood again. "But first he tells us more. What truth is on this drive, and who wants it badly enough to kill for it?" The prisoner leaned back, as far as his restraints would allow, and sighed dramatically. "You see through me completely? Fine, I'll tell you what I know, which isn't everything. I'm just the middleman. You're dealing with something way bigger than a simple frame job." Max had had enough of cryptic hints and vague threats. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing with 5 years of accumulated rage. "Tell me what's on that drive or you'll regret it." The words were delivered with such quiet intensity that even Lewis raised an eyebrow. Blackwood glanced nervously at Storm's bared teeth and finally spoke through clenched teeth. "Bank transfers, secret deals, names of the people who did everything they could to see you dead. You're not just innocent, Donovan. You're the only obstacle to people who would have lost millions if you had lived to testify about what you saw that night." Max clenched his jaw so tightly it hurt. He'd always known, from the moment the police had burst into his apartment and found him standing over Pembroke's body, he'd known this was bigger than it appeared. He was just the scapegoat, the convenient fall guy with a plausible motive. "Who's behind this?" Liv asked, her voice cold with anger. "Give us names." The man didn't answer, immediately weighing his odds. Lewis cocked the gun, the sound unnervingly final in the quiet room. "That was your last chance." A split second of silence hung in the air, and then a shot rang out, but it wasn't Lewis who fired. Outside the window, a flash lit up the glass. Blackwood's eyes went wide with shock, and then he slumped forward in the chair, blood blossoming across his chest. "Damn it!" Lewis shouted, pushing Max and Liv to the floor. Another bullet smashed through the window, embedding itself in the wall, where Max's head had been moments before. "We need to get out of here now." Liv yelled, her voice tight with fear. Lewis snatched the flash drive from Max's hand and ran for the back door, staying low. Storm followed silently, ears perked and alert, his body tense but controlled. The dog moved with the precision of his military training, staying close to Max as they made their way through the small kitchen toward the cabin's rear exit. Outside, tires screeched on the gravel driveway. The sound of car doors opening and closing was followed by shouted commands. "Surround the place. No one gets out alive." "It's the same people from the warehouse," Liv shouted as they burst through the back door into the wooded area behind the cabin. Lewis took cover behind a large pine tree and checked his weapon. "Then let's finish this fast." He drew back the slide and returned fire, providing cover, as Max and Liv sprinted toward a secondary vehicle, an old pickup truck partially hidden under a tarp. Max ran awkwardly with the chains still on his ankles, but adrenaline and determination propelled him forward. Storm leaped into the truck bed as soon as Max threw open the door. Liv jumped into the passenger seat. "Once we get out of here, we're making this public," she said, her breath coming in quick gasps. "All of it." "Humphreyson." Max turned the key that Lewis had tossed him, the engine roaring to life. "Hold on tight!" He slammed the gas pedal and the truck lurched forward, bouncing over the uneven ground as it crashed through underbrush onto a narrow dirt road. In the rearview mirror, he saw Lewis provide covering fire for a few more seconds before sprinting to his charger. The man moved with incredible speed and precision, diving into the vehicle as bullets pinged off the metal around him. Both vehicles shot away from the cabin in different directions, a tactical split that would force their pursuers to divide their forces. Max headed north deeper into the forest, while Lewis took the main road back toward the city. The flash drive was with Lewis the safer choice given his resources and connections, but that meant Max, Liv, and Storm were now the perfect decoy, drawing attention away from the crucial evidence. "They'll follow us," Max said grimly, navigating the rough road with skill despite his years away from the wheel. "They think we still have the drive." Liv nodded, her face pale but determined. "Then we lead them away from Lewis as long as possible." She reached into the back window and briefly touched Storm's fur-drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. What's the plan?" Max's eyes hardened as he focused on the road ahead. "We survive the next 24 hours. That's the plan." The pickup truck bounced violently as it hit a deep rut in the dirt road. Liv grabbed the dashboard to steady herself while Storm maintained perfect balance in the truck bed, his training evident in every movement. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. They had successfully split the attackers' forces. "We need to get these chains off," Max said, glancing down at the heavy shackles still binding his wrists and ankles. The metal clinked with every movement, a constant reminder of his prisoner status. Liv nodded, her mind already working on solutions. "There's a veterinary clinic in Millfield about 20 miles north of here. It's where I did my internship. They'll have bolt cutters in the maintenance room." Max steered the truck onto a more established gravel road, heading deeper into the rural landscape. Fields of corn and wheat stretched on either side, providing no cover, but fewer witnesses. "Call ahead if you can. We don't want to surprise anyone." Liv pulled out her phone, but the screen remained dark. "Dead battery, of course." She tossed it onto the dashboard in frustration. "We'll manage," Max assured her, though his tone betrayed his concern. The chains were not just uncomfortable, they were a liability in a fight and would instantly identify him as an escaped prisoner to anyone they encountered. Meanwhile, Lewis was speeding toward Portsmouth on the main highway, the flash drive securely tucked into an inside pocket. In his rear-view mirror, he could see two black SUVs in pursuit, but they were falling behind as the Charger's superior engine put distance between them. He pressed a button on the steering wheel. "Marcus, it's me. I've got the package, need secure access to the containment facility, and send a cleanup team to the safe house. We had company." "Understood," came the terse reply. "Containment facility prepped ETA. 20 minutes if I can lose the tail. Portal open for 10 minutes from your signal. Don't be late." Lewis smiled grimly. "Never am." Back in the truck, Max and Liv had reached the outskirts of Millfield, a small farming community with a single main street. The veterinary clinic sat on the edge of town, a low brick building with a faded sign that read, "Millfield Animal Hospital." "Park around back," Liv directed, less visible from the road. Max guided the truck behind the building, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was almost disorienting after the constant rumble of the old vehicle. Storm jumped from the truck bed as soon as Max opened the door alert, but calm. "Let's move fast," Max said, chains clinking as he followed Liv to a side entrance. She retrieved a key from beneath a flower pot, small-town security at its finest, and unlocked the door. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and animal fur, familiar and comforting to Liv, but strange to Max after years of prison's institutional odors. They moved quickly through the darkened treatment room to a maintenance closet in the back. Here, Liv said, retrieving a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters from a wall hook, "These should do it." It took several minutes of careful work to remove the chains without injuring Max's wrists and ankles. When the last shackle fell away, he rubbed the raw skin beneath, feeling a profound sense of relief. "Thank you," he said, simply, the words inadequate for what she had done for him, not just now, but over the past 5 years caring for Storm when he couldn't. Liv met his eyes, understanding what he wasn't saying. "We should find you some clothes. That jumpsuit screams prison escape." She rummaged through a storage room and found scrubs and a lab coat, not ideal, but better than prison orange. While Max changed, she collected first aid supplies and bottled water. "How long do we need to keep moving?" she asked as he emerged in the blue scrubs. "Until Lewis confirms the evidence is secure in public." Max replied, "Once that flash drive is in the right hands, they can't afford to kill us. It would only confirm everything." Storm's ears suddenly perked up, his body tensing. A low growl rumbled in his chest, alerting them to danger, seconds before they heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel outside. "Back door," Max whispered, grabbing the supplies Liv had gathered. They slipped out through a storage area just as the front door of the clinic burst open. "Check everywhere," a voice commanded. "They're here somewhere." They ran across an open field behind the clinic, heading for a stand of trees that offered the only cover in sight. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dew-covered grass, making their escape visible to anyone watching. A shout confirmed their worst fears. There by the trees, gunshots followed, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet as they ran. Max pushed Liv ahead of him, using his body to shield her from the gunfire. Storm kept pace, staying low and close. They reached the tree line just as more shots rang out. Max felt a searing pain across his upper arm. A bullet had grazed him, tearing through the scrub top and leaving a bloody furrow in his flesh. "Keep moving," he urged, ignoring the pain. "We need to put distance between us and them." As they pushed deeper into the woods, the sounds of pursuit faded temporarily. Their hunters would need to regroup, possibly get vehicles to the other side of the forest. It bought them minutes and not hours. Liv noticed the blood seeping through Max's sleeve. "You're hit," she said, her professional instincts taking over. "Let me see." Later, Max insisted, "We need to keep moving." But Liv stood her ground. 5 minutes to bandage it, or you'll leave a blood trail they can follow." Max couldn't argue with that logic. He allowed her to clean and bandage the wound, wincing as she applied antiseptic. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly as she worked. "Helping me, risking your life. You barely know me." Liv's hands paused briefly, then continued their careful work. "I know enough," she replied. "I know you write to Storm every week. I know you never stop fighting to prove your innocence. I know you have nightmares about your sister's death. You talk about it in your sleep during my visits." She secured the bandage and met his eyes. "And I know what it's like to be wrongfully accused, to have no one believe you. My medical license was suspended for 6 months after a patient's owner blamed me for a death that wasn't my fault. It nearly destroyed me. And that was just 6 months, not 5 years on death row." Max was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. "Thank you," he said again, the simple phrase carrying the weight of everything he couldn't express. Storm suddenly tensed, looking back the way they had come. The dog's behavior was all the warning they needed. "They're coming," Max said, rising to his feet. "We need to move." Across the city, Lewis Cook had reached his destination, an unmarked warehouse in the industrial district that served as a secure facility for his operation. The pursuing vehicles had been lost in a complex series of maneuvers through the city's congested streets. Inside, a team of technicians waited with computer equipment ready. Lewis handed over the flash drive, watching as they inserted it into an isolated system designed to prevent any tracking or hacking attempts. Full encryption. A young woman with bright purple hair reported, "High-level stuff." "Can you break it?" Lewis asked, though he already knew the answer. He didn't hire people who couldn't deliver. "Already working on it," she replied, fingers flying over the keyboard. "But there's something else, a dead man's switch. If this isn't accessed with the right protocols, it self-destructs." Lewis frowned. "How long?" "To crack it safely, 4 hours minimum." "We don't have 4 hours," Lewis said grimly. "Max and Dr. Chen are out there with killers on their trail." The technician bit her lip. "There might be another way. The encryption might respond to biometric authentication. The original users." "Pembroke is dead," Lewis pointed out. "Not him," she clarified. "Whoever created this security system, and I'm betting it wasn't Pembroke, he was the target, not the whistleblower." "Ardashuri, Tur, Santur." Lewis's mind raced, connecting dots that had eluded him for years. It was Max. He must have found Pembroke's files, copied them, and secured them with his own encryption before the murder. The technician nodded. "If that's the case, we need his fingerprint, maybe even retinal scan." So we need to find Max before the killers do, Lewis concluded. And we've got less than 4 hours before the warden realizes he's made a terrible mistake and rescinds the stay of execution. The sun had risen fully by the time Max and Liv reached the edge of the forest. Before them stretched miles of farmland with little cover, but staying in the woods meant certain capture once their pursuers deployed more men. "We need transportation," Max said, scanning the horizon. In the distance, he spotted a small farmhouse with several vehicles parked outside. "We can't just steal a car," Liv protested. "We're not going to steal it," Max assured her. "We're going to borrow it with permission." They approached the farmhouse cautiously, Storm trotting beside them. An elderly man was working in the garden, his back to them, as they approached. "Excuse me, sir," Max called, careful to keep his distance so as not to alarm the man. The farmer turned, revealing a weathered face beneath a John Deere cap. He squinted at them suspiciously. "Help you folks." Max made a split-second decision to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "My name is Maxwell Donovan. You might have heard of me on the news." The farmer's eyes widened in recognition. "The fellow they were about to execute. Thought you looked familiar." "Yes, sir. There's been new evidence discovered that proves my innocence. But there are people trying to stop that evidence from coming to light. People who want to kill us." The farmer studied them for a long moment, taking in Max's bandaged arm, the makeshift clothes, Liv's exhausted face, and the alert German shepherd at their side. "My grandson showed me some things on the internet," he said slowly, "about your case. Seemed to him there were a lot of holes in the prosecution story." He paused. "My pickup's got a full tank, keys are in it." Relief flooded through Max. "Thank you, we'll make sure it gets back to you." The farmer waved dismissively. "Don't worry about that, just make sure the truth gets out." He turned back to his garden, then added, "Blue tarp in the truck bed. Might help hide that dog if you're driving through town." They thanked him again and quickly made their way to the pickup, an older model Ford with a spacious cab. Storm jumped into the back and Liv helped cover him with the tarp, leaving enough open for him to breathe comfortably. As they pulled away, Max caught the farmer watching them from the garden. The man raised his hand in a silent salute, a gesture of solidarity that touched Max deeply after years of being viewed as a monster. "Where to now?" Liv asked as they turned onto a county road. Max considered their options. "We need to contact Lewis, find out what's on that drive. But using a phone is risky. They could be monitoring cellular traffic." "I know a place," Liv said suddenly. "My friend Nina owns a cyber cafe in Riverside. She's got satellite internet that doesn't run through the regular networks. Lewis could send a secure message there." "How far?" "Hunty, about 40 minutes straight west." Max nodded and turned the truck toward Riverside, keeping to back roads whenever possible. They traveled in companionable silence for several miles, both lost in their own thoughts. "Do you remember what was on that drive?" Liv finally asked. Max stared ahead at the road, his expression distant. "Not details." Things happened so fast that night. He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "I was investigating Senator Wells's connection to illegal pharmaceutical trials. My sister Hannah died after taking one of their experimental drugs, a cancer treatment that turned out to be toxic." "I'm sorry," Liv said softly. Max nodded acknowledgement. "After she died, I started digging, found connections between Meridian Shipping Wells Company and Nexus Pharmaceuticals. They were importing untested drugs using desperate patients as guinea pigs. I had evidence, but not enough to go public. Then Pembroke contacted me. He was Nexus's R&D director, but he'd developed a conscience after seeing the death toll. Said he had files, internal memos, proof of what they were doing. We arranged to meet at his apartment." Max's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "When I got there, he was already dead. Someone had beaten me to him, but his computer was still on files open. I copied everything to a drive, encrypted it, and was about to leave when the police burst in. Perfect timing to find me standing over a dead body. They framed you." Liv said, the pieces fitting together. It was the perfect solution for them. Shut down the whistleblower, eliminate the investigator, and tie everything up with a neat bow. Grieving brother takes revenge for his sister's death. No one looked deeper. Nori you are edihoditi. But you kept the drive on Storm's collar. Liv looked back at the covered shape in the truck bed. You knew they'd never think to check a dog. Max nodded. It was a desperate move. I called Storm to me right before they handcuffed me. Gave him the command to protect. I had no way of knowing if it would work, if the drive would stay hidden all these years. Why not tell your lawyers about it? I couldn't risk it. Max explained. If I mentioned the drive, they'd start looking for it. And if the wrong people found out, he let the sentence hang unfinished. So you waited, Liv concluded. For 5 years on death row, you waited for the right moment. I almost waited too long, Max admitted quietly. They reached the outskirts of Riverside just as Lewis's message came through on the secure terminal at Nina's cyber cafe. Liv's friend had welcomed them without question, recognizing Max from the news, but offering help instead of judgment. He's decrypted the first layer, Nina reported, reading from the screen. Lots of financial records, internal memos, names of officials who were bribed, patients who died in the trials. Max leaned forward, scanning the message. He says they need my biometric authorization to access the final level of encryption. Can you provide that remotely? Nina asked. No, Max replied. We need to get back to the city. Nina's fingers flew over the keyboard, sending a reply to Lewis with their location and status. Within moments, he responded with coordinates for a meeting point. He says to be careful. Nina translated, the story is already breaking. Someone at the Justice Department has started an official investigation. Based on the preliminary evidence, Senator Wells has been brought in for questioning. Max felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the first signs that justice might finally be served. But he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Wells has powerful friends. They'll still try to silence us. Lewis says the same thing. Nina confirmed he's arranging protection, but it's not in place yet. You need to stay under the radar for a few more hours. They thanked Nina and returned to the truck as Storm alert and ready in the back. The drive back toward Portsmouth would take them through areas with heavier traffic and more potential witnesses, increasing the risk of detection. We need to change vehicles. Max decided this one is too recognizable by now. Liv pointed to a shopping center ahead. We could try there, find someone willing to trade cars temporarily. But as they pulled into the parking lot, Max spotted 2 police cruisers idling near the entrance. Not good. The warden must have reported me missing by now. He quickly reversed, taking a side exit out of the lot before the officers noticed them. We need another option. Liv thought for a moment. The train? There's a station about 5 miles from here. We could leave the truck, take the commuter rail into the city. With a German Shepherd, Max raised an eyebrow. Service dog vest in my bag, Liv explained. I use it when I have to bring Storm to places with no pet policies. Max nodded appreciatively. That could work. They abandoned the farmer's truck in a long-term parking lot near the train station, leaving the keys under the mat with enough cash to cover a week's parking. Storm was now wearing a professional-looking service dog vest, his demeanor appropriately serious for his new role. The train was crowded with morning commuters, but they found seats near the back of a car, Storm lying obediently at their feet. Max kept his head down, aware that his face had been on the news during his trial, and again as his execution date approached. Halfway to Portsmouth, the train's speakers crackled with an announcement. Due to police activity, this train will be making an unscheduled stop. All passengers are required to present identification to law enforcement officers. We apologize for the inconvenience. Max tensed. They're looking for us. Liv glanced around desperately. We can't get off. We're on an elevated track. Storm sensed their anxiety. His body coiling with readiness, Max placed a calming hand on the dog's head, using the tactile connection to steady himself as well. We need a distraction, he whispered. Before Liv could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the car. A group of college students had started arguing loudly with the conductor about the delay. As the disturbance grew, passengers began crowding forward to see what was happening. Now, Max said, seizing the opportunity, they slipped from their seats and moved in the opposite direction through the connecting door to the next car. As they passed between cars, Liv caught a glimpse of familiar faces in the crowd on the platform. Lewis's men creating the diversion they needed. They made it through 3 more cars before reaching the last one. Here, emergency workers in high-visibility vests were helping passengers disembark onto a makeshift platform where the elevated track ran close to a building. Emergency evacuation. One worker announced, "This way, please." Max and Liv joined the flow of passengers, keeping their heads down. The worker winked almost imperceptibly as they passed another of Lewis's people, providing their escape route. Instead of following the other passengers down to the street, they were directed through a service door into the building. Inside, a woman in a business suit waited with a tablet. "Mr. Donovan, Dr. Chen. This way, please." She led them to a freight elevator that descended to an underground parking garage. "Mr. Cook is waiting." The elevator doors opened to reveal Lewis standing beside a nondescript sedan, his expression grim but satisfied. "Glad you could make it. We need to move quickly. The situation is evolving." Once they were in the car, Storm settling comfortably in the back seat with Liv, Lewis brought them up to speed. The evidence is solid: financial records, emails, internal memos. Senator Wells was running human trials through shell companies, bringing in experimental drugs through Meridian Shipping's ports without FDA approval. At least 31 deaths, including your sisters. Max absorbed this in silence, emotions warring within him. Vindication mixed with grief for Hannah and the other victims. "What about Pembroke?" he finally asked. The files confirm he was going to blow the whistle. There's an email chain between Wells and Vincent Blackwood discussing how to handle the problem. They decided to frame you knowing your history of publicly confronting Pembroke about your sister's death. And now, Liv asked, "Now we need your biometric authentication to unlock the final level of encryption." Pembroke left something there, something he called the insurance policy. Whatever it is, Wells is terrified of it becoming public. His people are getting desperate. The car wound through underground passages, eventually emerging into a secure garage beneath an unmarked building in the financial district. Armed guards nodded to Lewis as they drove past evidence of the resources at his disposal. "Welcome to my operation," Lewis said as they parked. "Officially, we don't exist. Unofficially, we clean up messes that the traditional system can't or won't handle." Inside the facility resembled a high-tech command center. Screens displayed news feeds, surveillance footage, and data streams. Staff worked at computer stations coordinating what appeared to be a global operation. The purple-haired technician from earlier approached. "Everything's ready for the final decryption. We just need Mr. Donovan's fingerprint and retinal scan." Max followed her to a secure room where sophisticated scanning equipment waited. The process took only moments: a fingerprint scanner followed by a retinal scan that felt like a camera flash against his pupil. Biometric authentication accepted. The computer announced decryption in progress. The screens filled with data, more financial records, but also video files. The technician clicked on one, and a man's face filled the screen. Jonathan Pembroke, alive and speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, I'm dead," he began. "My name is Jonathan Pembroke, Research Director for Nexus Pharmaceuticals. What I'm about to share implicates Senator Harrison Wells, CEO Marcus Blackwood of Meridian Shipping, and several government officials in criminal activity that has caused multiple deaths." Max watched transfixed as Pembroke methodically laid out the entire conspiracy: names, dates, locations. The video was his testimony, recorded in case he didn't live to deliver it in person. "I've provided this evidence to Maxwell Donovan, whose sister Hannah was one of our victims. If anything happens to either of us, this information will be made public." Hero. Pembroke's dead man switched the protection that was supposed to keep them both alive. But Wells had moved too quickly, killing Pembroke and framing Max before the system could be activated. "There's more," the technician said, clicking on another file. This one contained video from Pembroke's apartment security footage showing two men entering, one of whom was unmistakably Vincent Blackwood. They confronted Pembroke, and after a brief argument, Blackwood shot him. The footage continued showing Max's arrival minutes later, his discovery of the body, and his desperate copying of files before the police burst in exactly as he had described. "This clears you completely," Liv said, her voice thick with emotion. "It shows exactly what happened." Lewis was already on the phone. "Get this to the Attorney General now, and make sure copies go to every major news outlet. We need this public before anyone can suppress it." Within hours, the story was breaking across every platform, footage of Senator Wells being led away, in handcuffs played on loop on news channels. Reporters surrounded the Justice Department, where officials confirmed that Maxwell Donovan was being fully exonerated based on incontrovertible new evidence. 24 hours later, a news anchor on CNN delivered the update that would close the chapter on 5 years of injustice. In a shocking turn of events, evidence from an anonymously delivered flash drive has uncovered a conspiracy that nearly cost an innocent man his life and has drawn high-ranking politicians and business leaders into an international corruption scandal. Maxwell Donovan, who was scheduled for execution just 1 day ago, has now been fully exonerated. The screen split to show footage of Senator Harrison Wells being escorted from his office in handcuffs, his face a mask of outrage. Documents reveal that Senator Wells, along with executives from Nexus Pharmaceuticals, orchestrated the murder of whistleblower Jonathan Pembroke and framed former military contractor Maxwell Donovan for the crime. The conspiracy was meant to conceal illegal human trials of an experimental drug that resulted in at least 31 deaths. Max watched the screen from an anonymous hotel room, his prison uniform replaced with borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. The physical and emotional scars of his ordeal remained, but for the first time in 5 years, he could see a future beyond cement walls and iron bars. Lewis stood nearby, arms crossed over his chest, a satisfied expression on his normally stoic face. Liv gently petted Storm, who lay peacefully beside the bed, exhausted but content to be with his master again. "We did it," Liv said quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's over." Max took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 5 years begin to lift from his shoulders. 5 years of not knowing if he would live or die. 5 years of pain and isolation. But now his life was finally his again. He would need time to process it all, to learn how to live as a free man. He leaned towards Storm, scratching behind the ears exactly how the dog liked. "You saved me, boy." Storm wagged his tail, brown eyes fixed on Max with unwavering devotion. Lewis's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up with a grim expression. "That was my contact at Justice Wells is in custody, but 3 of his associates managed to flee the country, and Vincent Blackwood wasn't his only enforcer." Max's eyes hardened. "Then we're not done." He stood up, the weariness of moments before replaced by determination. "They tried to kill Storm. They framed me for murder. They were willing to let me die to cover their tracks." "What are you suggesting?" Liv asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Justice through the system is a start," Max said quietly. "But it won't reach everyone involved. Someone has to make sure all the loose ends are tied up." Lewis nodded slightly, understanding perfectly. "I have resources, contacts, people who operate outside traditional channels, and I have medical training and knowledge of toxicology." Liv added, surprising both men. "Hannah wasn't the only person I lost to Nexus's treatments. My mother was in their first trial group." Max looked at her with new understanding. Her dedication to his cause suddenly made perfect sense. They were both seeking justice for family destroyed by corporate greed. Max called Storm to his side, the dog immediately alert and ready. In the span of 48 hours, Max had gone from death row to freedom, from hopelessness to purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't rest until everyone responsible for the past 5 years faced consequences. "Then we finish what they started," Max said, his voice calm but resolute. In his eyes burned a fire that would not be extinguished until justice, real justice, had been served. As he looked down at Storm, his loyal companion who had kept the key to his freedom safe all these years, Max made a silent promise. The men who had tried to silence him would soon learn a painful lesson. Some guardians never stop watching, never stop fighting, and never ever forget. And as the sun set on his first day of freedom, Max Donovan understood that his journey was not ending, but beginning anew with Storm at his side. Liv's compassion lighting the way, and Lewis's resources supporting their mission, they would become the last guardians of a justice that the system could not provide. For Hannah, for all the victims, and for the 5 years stolen from his life, Max would ensure that the truth, once revealed, would never again be buried in darkness.